Hello everyone, I'm Dom, and today we're going to be talking about how to set up your master scene. Now, your master scene is going to be an environment in which all of your assets are going to be referenced in, so that ways we can add things like lights and cameras, and we can start moving things around, and we can start recording and rendering and doing all of our, finishing up our projects. So what we've been doing so far is we've been building our assets each in their own file. So for example, this is a robot. It's just got the robot. There's nothing else in this file. And this guy is textured, let's say, and it's ready to go. So we're going to send this into a master scene. So first things first, what you want to do with all of your assets, just like what we have here in this robot file, is we want to set it to a particular project. A project is a space, a folder in which all of our files, all of our textures, everything like that is going to be found. And we are going to save it into the scenes subfolder. So let's go ahead and get started. So up here at the very top, we're just going to go to File, and we're going to go down to Set Project. I'm going to select the VDevRig folder. It's important for this guide to be on your desktop or on a permanent, like, physical directory in your computer. So it's better to not use a cloud drive like OneDrive or Google Drive. It's better to have your VDevRig folder in the desktop where we initially set it up in the first place. So we'll save it to that guy, and that's where everything is going to be put in. So we set the project. Now let's go ahead and save this. We're going to go to File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to go, you'll notice that it defaults to the Scenes subfolder. So just like the VDevRig file itself, all of our Maya files are now going to be saved in this VDevRig Scenes subfolder. As you can see, I've got a whole bunch of crap in here. We're going to hit Save. I've already saved this before, so I'm overwriting it, but make sure to save all of your assets in the Scenes subfolder of your VDevRig. And so once we've done both of those things for our Maya files, let's go ahead and make a new scene. So I've got this blank scene. We're going to do the same thing, File, Set Project. We're going to set this to the scenes, the VDevRig folder. And we are going to go to File, Save Scene As, and save this. I'm going to call this Master Scene. And you should name yours Master Scene as well. And so now this is empty. But everything is going to be pulled from the VDevRig folder. If you have Maya files, like other assets that you have, they're going to be saved in the scene subfolder. And so now it's going to be really easy for us to reference items in. So let's remind ourselves about how to reference in objects into Maya. So we're going to go to File, and we're going to go down to Reference Editor. You can also hit Control R to reference something in, but in the Reference Editor, you'll notice it's all blank. We can add in our new one, and let's say we're adding in this robot, and there it is, all loaded up. This guy is good to go. So it was really easy to find it because it defaults to that workspace, that VDevRig folder, the project, and so you can just bring stuff in really quickly by doing this, which is nice. It's going to save us a lot of time. And so the nice thing about this is if we have another one that we want to reference in, let's say what's left of this guy right here, right? We can pull this in as well. I'm going to shrink this down, maybe move this around and place it like so. And we're going to get all of our objects in here and start moving them around and start repositioning them. And we can, of course, scale them and do things like that. Of course, this is a group, so I'm grabbing it by the outliner here and just moving it around. Ultimately, our goal with this master scene is to set up the full environment where everything is positioned as we kind of decided and directed it in our concept art. So for example, I've got another master scene over here in which I've pulled all of this stuff. I've made a terrain, I've made different objects, I've made, a bunch of this stuff, and I've have it arranged accordingly. And so in here, we can do things like add in lights. So for example, I've got a dome light that's around here, but we can also add in a whole bunch of other stuff. We're going to have a whole video talking about lighting and the different settings and different types of lights that we can add in. So I'm going to save that for a separate video. The only thing that we're going to talk about now for this particular moment is cameras and how to add in cameras and what you can do with it. So once you have your master scene all laid out, you've referenced in all of your objects, kind of like what we've got here. Then we can add in cameras and start arranging those guys to look through. So that ways we can render out specific shots. We can have those cameras move and everything like that. Now, working with cameras or adding in cameras is very easy. All we have to do is we have to go to the very, very top and we'll hit Create. down here we'll hit cameras and we'll select this guy right here. There are different types of cameras, but we're going to stick with this very basic one. So create cameras camera. We'll add it in. You'll notice it'll pop up in your outliner over here. And your camera, if I zoom in onto it, we'll kind of see it. It looks like this. So it is a little outline of a film camera or wireframe of a film camera. And of course, if you hit W, you can move it. If you hit E, you can kind of angle it different ways. And if you hit R, you can scale it, although that doesn't really have an effect on what this camera does. So we can position this camera into the particular angles that we've designated for our shots. So we can move it over and do all sorts of other fun stuff. However, it might be easier for you to see what the camera is showing or what the camera is angled at. And so we can switch our viewport over to our camera view by clicking Panels, Perspective. And I'm going to click on this new camera that we've added in. This is camera 6. And so now I'm moving my viewport around to kind of get a better idea of what we're looking at. And let's say if we want this camera to be perhaps over here. Kind of like that. Then you'll notice that if I switch out to perspective, my camera has moved into this new location. When working with cameras, important things to note. This camera can be physically blocked or obstructed by something. If it's, for example, clipped into an object like this, it will render, black because it's just, inside of an object. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that our camera is in a physical space that is not obstructed by anything. Very, very important. Now that we know how to add in cameras, let's go ahead, switch back into our camera and have a look at some of the settings that will pop up in your attribute editor. So we've got a lot of settings over here, and these take inspiration or reference from how physical film cameras work in real life. So we do have up here, for example, the angle of view and the focal length. The focal length is probably the one that you're going to modify if you want something like a wide angle shot, or or to modify just how much you will be able to see in your camera. So the lower number will give you kind of this fishbowl effect. But if I increase this number to, let's say, 55 or 50, you'll notice that it kind of closes in just how much of periphery that this guy is able to see. And so if I type in something very large, let's say 100, right, this is going to give you kind of this very tightened in effect, which is nice. It defaults to 35. Of course, if you set this to a very low number, you'll start to get kind of this weird, not quite fisheye, but a very wide angle shot. Camera scale, that's just the physical size of the camera. We'll leave that alone. Down here under film back, you've got a couple of different things that you can modify. So let me set this guy back to 35. And let's see, we're going to skip through some of these guys. Film aspect ratio, we don't need to mess with that. We're going to be rendering this out based on your render settings. And we'll kind of set that up in just a little bit down here too. I'm going to skip through these guys real quick. Of course, you can mess around with your aperture, that it changes how it reacts to light or the lighting that's in your scene. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to skip all the way down to depth of field. Depth of field is something that you can enable or disable, and you'll notice that if you enable it, everything goes blurry. But that's okay. Depth of field controls an area or a region or distance away from your camera that is going to be in focus, and things that are in front or behind that particular distance are going to be out of focus, just like a real physical camera. So what we could do is we could set a focus distance. Let's say if I want this to be, if I want this portion to be in focus, but perhaps everything else behind it will be very blurry, then I'll set, that particular distance away. You can, of course, mess with the f-stop. The f-stop controls the intensity of that blur that you have. So if I lower it, the more blurry it will read. And of course, if I raise it, the less blurry or the less contrast of focus that you'll see from different distances. So we can kind of set this to be kind of realistic to how different other cameras in the real world have it. Of course, if we go down to, let's see, other attributes that you can mess around with are going to be how this guy interacts with different masks and layers. We're not going to necessarily talk about that. This is just a very basic intro to camera work. So the main thing that you're going to be messing around with necessarily is going to be depth of field if you want it. It's kind of nice because it gives us a little bit of a elevated sense of physicality. And then we're going to be messing with angle of view, or sorry, not angle of view, focal length to give us either wide angle shots, or if we want to narrow this down and get something that's a little bit more telescopic. The final thing that we can add in, or that we're going to add in, is called a resolution gate. And so this resolution gate will kind of block in exactly what the aspect ratio of your camera will look like, because this viewport can change. If I make it, you know, a little bit more narrow, obviously this is not what's going to be rendered out in the camera. So we're going to come over here, and you've got some tools up at the top in this display toolbar, and we're going to click on resolution gate. And the resolution gate will show this little grayed out frame, and in this frame is going to be what is actually going to be rendered in your camera, and it's based on the resolution that you've set in render settings. So this tells me that the objects that are, you know, out here in this grayed out portion are not going to be visible in the camera whenever I render it out. So very quickly, I should note, the resolution is going to be set up here. Right now it says 2560 by 1440, so it's 2K. Of course, you can change this anytime by going to Render Man, Render Settings, and in your render settings, you're going to scroll all the way down until you see image size, and you can either enter in your own pixel resolution value, or you can choose a preset. For example, preset HD 1080 is just standard high definition 1920 by 1080. You can also, you know, replace these values with something like 4K. Of course, it'll take longer to render higher resolution images, but that is something that we can do here. So once you have this guy all set up, then of course you can go ahead and render this guy out through the camera. And if you hit just the R, whatever camera that you're in, it will render inside of this camera. And of course, if we're batch rendering, it will be in its own little spot as well too. We can set the cameras that are going to be batch rendered out. In another video, we'll talk about that. So today, what we've talked about is saving and setting your different asset projects within the VDEV Rig folder. We learned how to create a new scene, name it Masterscene, and do the same thing. We're going to set the project in the VDEV Rig and then, of course, save it in the scene subfolder. So that way we can reference in all of our assets. All of our assets need to be brought in. Whenever we reference these in, the nice thing about referencing is if we ever need to go back and modify the different objects that we brought in, it's very easy for us to do so. We can just modify it in the original one and then, you know, reload or refresh that reference. Once we have those guys in, then we can set up cameras in their specific locations and positions, so that way we can kind of get our shots. We're going to have talks about how to animate those cameras too. If we want our camera to let's say, dolly or pan, we can do that absolutely. And later on, we'll also talk about how to set up lights, the different types of lights that we use and things like that. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, do let me know. Of course, this is a very big file, so it's going to take forever to render. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of how to bring in all of your stuff, reference it out, and then, of course, set up your cameras for your master scene, for setting it up for lighting, for setting it up for animation, and everything like that. As I said before, if you have any questions, do let me know. But with that being said, good luck on your project, and bye-bye.